Good evening and welcome to the Monday, September 12th, 2022 Plan Commission and Commission for Citizen Involvement meeting. Iris, would you please roll call?
Heap.
Here.
Leak is excused. Mitchell is excused. Moreno.
Here.
Phillips.
Here.
Rigby.
Here.
Thank you. And Councilor Manns.
Here.
Thank you, Iris. We'll now call the meeting to order. We have quorum. First on our agenda tonight, we're absent of our chair and our vice chair. So the first thing we'd like to do tonight is make a motion to elect a chair for the length of the meeting today. I'll make the motion to elect a chair. I guess we need to nominate first.
Well, you can include that in your motion if you
Okay.
if you want to.
We'll make a motion to vote and to elect the chair for tonight. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None? It's unanimous. So any nominations? I'd like to encourage some of our new commissioners. It's a good opportunity tonight to lead the commission. Commissioner Rigby, is there any interest on your part to chair our meeting tonight?
I would be interested, but I feel that perhaps being on Zoom makes me less suitable.
Okay, Commissioner Marino or Commissioner Michaud?
I nominate Rob.
And I second that.
All right, I was hoping that we might have a new chair just for tonight, but it's fine. I'm happy to be the chair for the purposes of tonight only. So we made a motion. I think it's all approved. I'll chair for this evening.
Well, I think Commissioner Phillips has made the motion. You've seconded it, so it'd be appropriate to go ahead and vote on that motion.
Sure. Okay. So we'll take a vote for the motion for me to be acting chair for tonight only. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 So it's unanimous. So we'll move on to the agenda. First thing on the agenda tonight is item number 3, council update. Councilor Manns, would you like to give us an update?
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, Commission. You know, we were on recess for the month of August. Not a lot to report thus far. We did have a very robust and interesting conversation around tree removal at our last Tuesday's meeting, where we were in fact deadlocked, something that doesn't normally happen. We were one member short, so the meeting was tabled until the 20th, when the other counselor will be back, and we will see how that will go. Other than that, frankly, that really took up the lion's share of our meeting. Now, while I'm sitting up here, and because I am not often in person, are there any questions that anyone would like to ask me?
Sure. Commissioners, questions for Councilor Manns?
No.
I had a couple questions, Councilor.
Please.
One was on the tree code. Is there anything that the Plan Commission could do in future instances to help out? I don't think so, as we know the tree code is separate mostly from the development code, so there's not a lot of opportunities. I think in terms of process, the only thing I was observing is a lot of times we get into issues in the Plan Commission. I know the commissioners may agree or disagree on this, but you know, we try to say, especially in our quasi-judicial reviews, let's just focus on the code. Is it meeting the criteria of the code? And sometimes it's too tempting to get off track and look and say, you know, is this the right thing to do or not? You know, and look at bigger policy questions. But I think when it comes to those type of, you know, really controversial and hard to make decisions, it really comes down to, are we meeting the objectives of the code or not? Is the criteria met on the code or not? And that helps. But I saw part of that discussion, and yeah, it was very interesting, and you know, lots of discussions on the tree. So Well, I hope council has a positive outcome on that. I'm sure they will.
We'll have an outcome. You know, you bring up a very good point, Chair, and I don't want to take too much of your time, but we will be seeing a relatively young council coming in, young insofar as they don't have the institutional knowledge that perhaps previous councils have had. And I have been talking to the city manager about that, and it may be an interest, and I'm putting myself out there a bit, it may be interesting to have, for example, folks who have been involved in the citizen committee to join in, maybe have a panel discussion, talk about these very things and some of the ways that they've been resolved and how to look at simply in a quasi-judicial the letter of the law, if you will, or the code or whatever is being discussed, and leave the sidebar conversations for a future study session or whatever the case may be. As far as trees and development code go, that's certainly not going to happen during my term, nor do I want to put that out there as something that I am either for or against, because that'll be for a future council to decide. But you propose a very interesting idea to utilize folks who have a lot of experience in citizen comment. So I've made a note of that.
Sure, thank you. My second question, are you aware of any policy changes that have occurred with the chargers? I think it was like 3 or 4 plan commission meetings. We talked about the chargers on Avenue A down here, and they're inoperative. And then the chargers here at City Hall work, but you know, I frequently use them, and I noticed a change in the policy that, you know, they're now charging a fee for the electricity use for the time on the charger, and they're also charging a parking fee. And that seems like it's maybe a policy change. It's the first that I'm aware of in all of Lake Oswego that cities charging parking fees. So my questions would be, is there an advisory committee that's giving input to the city on what those policies are? I'd highly recommend it. I think the policy of creating parking fees is an incorrect one. A better one may be looking at, you know, are people idle at the chargers and blocking use for the public to use? Those should be fees. But if you're charging, and the limit now is, I understand it, and as I was billed, was you can only use the charger for 2 hours, and then after 2 hours, you're incurring a 75-cent per hour parking fee in addition to whatever electricity you use. I just think that's wrong. I'm hoping that there's some, you know, public involvement, there's some, you know, committee that's providing input to the city on what the correct policies are. In general, I would advocate for a policy that encourages EV adoption and the use of charging and doesn't penalize them for parking. I think this was just a recent change, but that was my question, has something changed?
Thank you for that. As I pointed out, I really literally took recess during the month of August, and there may have been changes within the city manager's office or staff. I'm not saying that that is indeed the case, but as far as I know, there has not been public input along those lines. I could be completely wrong. I don't want to speak out of turn. Now that I am back and it is no longer recess, I have my next monthly meeting with the city manager. I'll check with her and express your concerns, as well as find out what we're going to be doing moving forward on that, if that be satisfactory.
All right, thank you. Yes, thanks, Councilor Mans. Any other questions for Councilor Mans?
Nothing.
No? All right, thank you.
Great, thank you.
Welcome back. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for all that you do. Appreciate it.
Our next agenda item is public comment, but I'd like to hold off for 1 second. Director Siegel, I know there's a large number of fair number of new members that we have. Are there any introductions that we'd like to make tonight, or should we hold that off for later? I thought it might be good to do the introductions now.
Yeah, thank you, Acting Chair Heap. I just wanted to introduce, we do have a new staff member. Christina Sequina is over here on your left, and she's administrative support with the planning department and supports both the long-range and current planning divisions of the department. Very pleased to have her, and I don't know if you wanted to just say anything, Christina, about, say hello.
I am happy to be here.
And Chair, I also would like, I'm pleased to announce that Eric Olson is now our long-range planning manager. We haven't had a long-range planning manager for some time, and it's been very helpful to me to have his support, certainly for the past 3 years in his capacity as a project manager and in delivering some of the highest priority work that we're doing in the city from the planning department, and has certainly proven himself to be more than capable, and I'm just really delighted to have Eric serving in that role and supporting us. And I might add that in that capacity, Eric will be assisting you and the commissioners through goal setting, and also in just day-to-day forecasting and making sure that we're staying on schedule with our work. So,
Thank you, Director Siegel.
Thanks, Scott, and I'm happy to continue to work with the Planning Commission and get to know some of the newer commissioners and work with you all on goal setting and getting through our workload next year and years to come after that, because I'm just focused on 2023 right now. But.
And I'm sorry, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that we did unfortunately lose a longtime staff member, Barb Dillinger, who'd been with the city for close to 30 years, and she fortunately, though, the silver lining is that she took a position much closer to her home in northern part of, I think, Clark County. She was commuting quite a distance, so we're happy for her, although we do miss her. On the other hand, we're fortunate to have Christina supporting our department, so I wanted to add that. We didn't add any positions. We filled a position.
Thank you, Director Siegel. Well, on behalf of the Plan Commission, we wish Barbara Dillinger the best of luck in her future endeavors, and wholeheartedly congratulations. It's fantastic to work with you, Senior Planner Olson. The Commission looks forward to continuing our relationship on long-term planning with staff and yourself, and then also welcome to Christina. We're glad that you've joined us, and we'll be working with you. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
All right. We'll move on then to public comment. This is regarding issues not on the agenda. This is an opportunity to raise issues regarding planning. A time limit of 3 minutes per individual applies. I believe we do have some folks who would like to make public comment. Carol Okert, would you like to give a comment tonight? We can move on if there's no other comments then for public comment, none. Okay, so we'll move on next to item number 5 on the agenda, Commission for Citizen Involvement General Updates. There were just some updates that I wanted to read, and then we'll come back to those that wish to make some comment on the Commission for Citizen Involvement. The first was a neighborhood meeting notice that the Commission received. So I'd like to read that. The Lake Grove Neighborhood Association Annual General Membership Meeting will be held Thursday, September 5th, 2022 at 7 p.m. at the Lake Grove Presbyterian Church, 4040 Sunset Drive in Lake Oswego. Encourage all those members of the Lake Grove Neighborhood Association to attend their annual general membership meeting. On the agenda will be council candidates forum. There'll be a call for neighborhood association volunteers, the annual election, a neighborhood association board and officers, and a neighborhood social after the forum and election. So encourage all of those in the Lake Grove Neighborhood Association to attend their annual meeting. And then also, I would like to recognize that the Commission did receive a couple emails. One was from Ms. Lindsay Bushisha. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. It was regarding Waluga Drive safety concern. So thank you, Lindsay, for sending that to the Commission. I know the staff responded to that. And there was a discussion with the city's traffic engineer. So as far as the Plan Commission goes, we'll work with staff and with council to see if there's any future work that the Plan Commission may work that may come before the Plan Commission. but I wanted to recognize the email and say that we did read through it. We got a second email that came from Mrs. Carrie Skagland, and that was in reference to the Palisades neighborhood overlay, proposing it. So thank you for sending in that email. The Plan Commission is looking at your email very carefully, and that is something that the Plan Commission is working on. So thank you for that email. Those were all the specific items that I had for the Commission for Citizen Involvement. So we do have some comments that citizens would like to make. Ms. Okert, I believe you'd like to make a comment for the Commission for Citizen Involvement.
Good evening. My name is Carol Okert. With new members on the Commission for Citizen Involvement, I would like to take a moment to introduce the Neighborhood Chairs Committee of Lake Oswego. For a number of years, the neighborhood associations met on a Saturday morning, usually every other month, with the mayor. That was discontinued, but neighborhood chairs had interest in continuing to meet. In September of 2020, the Neighborhood Chairs Committee was formed by a coalition of neighborhood chairs. Here are the neighborhood associations who are current members of the Neighborhood Chairs Committee: Blue Heron, Bryant, Evergreen, First Edition Forest Hills, Lake Forest, Lakewood, McVeigh South Shore, Old Town, Palisades, Rosewood, Skylands, Uplands, Waluga, Westlake, Westridge. We have 2-hour meetings on the third Saturday of every other month on Zoom. They are consistently very well attended with active participation from the group. We send out agendas and Zoom links to all neighborhoods. We encourage open, inclusive discussion and choose to work from a consensus model. As stated in our bylaws, our goals are to give input to the City Council, boards, and commissions, to facilitate bidirectional communication between neighborhood association members and the city, and to act as a resource for NCC members to discuss issues of importance to their respective neighborhood association members and our city, and educate neighborhood leadership. As Chair Leek knows, the NCC had 2 representatives serving on the Middle Housing Committee, and I often speak to Planning Commission and City Council representing the NCC, as I am doing here tonight. Thank you for stepping forward to serve on the Commission for Citizen Involvement and the Planning Commission. Neighborhood chairs truly understand the time commitment and appreciate your working to maintain the healthy community that we live in. And at our next meeting on Saturday, we're holding a forum with the City Council candidates to get to meet them and have them meet us. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Commissioners, any questions for Ms. Okert? No? Commissioner Rigby, no?
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Right. Next on the agenda is item number 6, the minutes from July 25th and August 8th. These weren't ready for today, so we'll push those to the future meeting. And we'll move on to item number 7, our work session. This is item 7.1 on the agenda, Non-Conforming Residential Development Work Session number 2, PP 22-0002, LU 22-0008. Public comments are accepted. The Commission will continue its review of the requirements for non-conforming residential developments. The staff coordinator is Scot Siegel, Director of Community Development. Director Siegel, would you like to give us an introduction?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Heap. And I'll just keep this brief because the Commission has actually had 2 work sessions already, and this is the 3rd work session. There was an error on the agenda. I apologize for that. At your prior work session on July 11th, the Commission received a report from staff, and our Senior Development Specialist, Jessica Murray Collins, presented data on structural permits that the city issues, and of those, how many are permits associated with non-conforming developments. And so we hope that it provided a picture of what it is that we're working with and what the really what the scope of any change to the policy on non-conforming development would look like in terms of the volume of permits or projects. And it's not a large number. As you heard, I think there were approximately 400 structural permits in the past year. And of those, about 6% would be affected in one way or another if there were a change in policy. So not a large number, but for those projects that are happening in your neighborhood, it's a significant impact. So what brought this to you, and what has brought us to today, is really a question of, I think, direction in terms of whether we move forward, how we move forward with proposed policy changes. The commission was interested in receiving more input from, I think, as you said, stakeholders, and primarily neighborhood association representatives and industry representatives. And so since your July meeting, I personally met with the Government Affairs Director for the Metropolitan Home Builders Association, and we reviewed the materials that you've reviewed. We went over the data. We went over the kind of the purpose and need for looking at the code change. And we also discussed the policy of non-conforming developments in the context of the Demolition Ordinance and the policy changes that the City Council put into effect earlier this summer. Because we thought, as we were discussing this with the Commission, we realized that the two, although they're not legally interconnected, there's a sort of a perception that whatever threshold is established for one should consider the standards for the other. Now, whether the two are in sync is a question, but when we talked about it with the home builders representative, I think he recognized the interconnection of those two policies. And generally, the feedback that I received was favorable. I think in terms of moving forward, they recognized and I think they appreciated the city's interest in refining that policy and to make it something more robust than it is today in terms of being able to leave a portion of one wall standing and be entitled to that ongoing nonconformity and really in perpetuity. They seem to recognize there's some merit in taking a look at that. I think, just to be perfectly candid, I think their interest is also in, the demolition tax, and, they may be pursuing some or advocating for some reforms to that, just to be completely transparent when that comes before City Council. I think there are housing policy reasons for that. The tax is a flat tax for demolitions that affects redevelopments for all types of housing, whether it's redevelopment of one new house replacing an existing house, or it's redevelopment with middle housing replacing that single family dwelling. The only exception really is where the replacement housing is income targeted affordable housing, then they're exempt from the tax. But I think in discussions with the Home Builders Association representative, they were interested in, I think, seeing, having the city explore some possible reforms in that way that would be more progressive in terms of housing. Also spoke with Ms. Okert, who's here this evening and representing the neighborhood chairs, and the feedback that I received, and she can certainly speak for herself, was that the neighborhood chairs are supportive of the city moving forward with policy changes. And we've done a lot of work on this up to this point. The work group that staff convened included Ms. Okert as a representative of the neighborhood chairs, along with the former chair of the Middle Housing Advisory Committee, who is also the chair of the DRC, and a home builder with experience in remodeling and new construction as well. So I think the draft concept that was before you and that we've been discussing up to this point is still sound. I don't have any reason to really second guess that or suggest any change in direction from what we've been discussing. But really what we're here for this evening is to get your guidance on kind of the scope of those changes. And there were a few different options that were being considered. And we can discuss those as we kind of get into the discussion of the changes, and if you wanted to ask for any input from the public this evening. I think really the key policy questions are, one, if we are going to establish a different standard for continuation of non-conforming residential developments, should it be the 50% removal of exterior walls and foundation as we've defined it for demolitions, for the demolition tax, or should it be something other than that? We haven't really modeled any other thresholds, but that seemed to be a reasonable starting point. Another question related to this that the work group discussed but didn't reach consensus on was if a home remodel project were adding more than a certain amount or percentage of floor area to what was on the lot, should that trigger full conformity to the code? So one question is, how much are you removing from the structure? Should that trigger, or should we establish a different threshold for bringing the whole property into conformance with the development code? And the second question is, if we're adding to the floor area on the lot from what was there before, should that trigger full conformity to the code? And if so, where should we establish those thresholds? So that really concludes my report, and just providing an update on where we're at, what I've heard from the stakeholders, and happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Director Siegel. Commissioners, questions for Director Siegel? Commissioner Phillips?
I guess my main question is, are we kind of stuck on what the percentage is? Nobody seems to have, it's not an obvious answer, 50% or 80%. Is that where we're at on this? Is that one of the major decisions? And if so, who's going to make it?
Yeah. Well, I think that, yes, I mean, that if the commission finds that this is still a problem that needs to be addressed, I think that's the threshold question. That's the fees. That's really the go or no go question. Is like, is there a problem here that still needs to be solved? And I think we've heard from the stakeholders that there's a problem with remodels that are sort of masquerading, or redevelopments that are masquerading as remodels where only a wall is left standing, and that really it's. I think the concern that we've heard is that, one, it's, and I'm paraphrasing, but we've heard people testify that it's disingenuous, to call this a remodel when it's by, kind of from the public's perception, it's an entirely new house. So that's a concern. Maybe it's a concern about public perception. Another concern is that by building onto a non-conforming structure, or what remains of a non-conforming structure, where it's placed closer to the property line than would otherwise be required, for example, that's an imposition on the neighbor. And I think that's the more salient point or argument, that this is an imposition because there is a wall that remains there after all of these years. It's, the builder is not required to remove it and start anew, but they're allowed, in fact, to build onto it, and that's an imposition on the neighbor. I think that, the sort of the counter, or the argument perhaps against doing this, is that by allowing one to maintain that non-conforming right, it's affording flexibility in situations where there's often constraints with the lot. It may be the lot itself is substandard. It's smaller than what the zoning would require today because it was created, 100 years ago. So having that flexibility may be important from a, housing production perspective, or just for flexibility for the homeowner to be able to remodel and add onto their home without having to tear the whole thing down. So I think there's pros and cons, and that's why the percentage is so critical, because if it's established too low, then I think that residents or the property owners may feel that it's punitive, and that the remodel, we're just adding a master suite onto the house, but we've passed this threshold of 50%. And now we have to tear down the entire house. So if it's set too high, like today, all you have to do is retain about 1%, just a portion of a wall, and then at least that portion of the structure is allowed to remain. So if it's set too high, then it's really, or as it's set today, I think the feedback we've received is that it's not moving us toward conformity with the code in a way that we should, with the way zoning is meant to be implemented.
Thank you, Director Siegel. Just to summarize kind of what Director Siegel was saying, I thought you made a good point there that really what the commission is going to be looking at is really, do we move forward and do we look at, how much are you allowed to remove before you trigger, a review of the non-conforming or make it conforming. So there's how much do you remove before it triggers a review, and then how much can you add in addition to that? So somebody may not be removing, but they may be adding, and as their threshold. And I think as we move forward in the commission, we'll start looking and getting input on those numbers. But what we're looking at for a work session is, is that something that we want to pursue? Are these questions before the commission something that should, again, continue on and be vetted by the Plan Commission and then a set of recommendations issued? Commissioners, other questions?
I would just echo the chair's comment that, of course, there's a no-go, no decision to make, whether we should move something forward. Ultimately, what should that be in the public hearing package? But you're not making a decision tonight as to what that percentage is. That would be subject to public hearing.
Thank you, Evan. So that's great. So you don't have to feel like you're locked in with whatever percentage you're recommending that staff put out there for a hearing. So you get into a hearing and you get public testimony, you may decide that that wasn't the appropriate, standard to set, and then you refine it.
Thank you, Director Siegel. Any other questions for staff? I see none. So at this point, I would like to open it up for public comment. And I do have a note that Ms. Oker would like to make a comment on non-conforming residential development. So Ms. Oker, would you like to come to the stand and give your comment?
Hi there.
Good evening.
I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you again this evening. The important topic of demolitions and pre-existing nonconformities was first raised in 2021 by the NCC reps during the Middle Housing Citizens Advisory Committee, of which Chair Leek was a member. The NCC has been closely following and actively participating in the topic since 2021. We've discussed it at every one of our meetings, 5 meetings since last October. A detailed Planning Commission work session was held on February 28th. Rather than move to a public hearing at that time, the decision was made to delay the public hearing. This was followed by a vociferous outcry on the part of many citizens writing into City Council wanting this non-conforming code and run fixed. In response to the flood of citizen emails back in March, here is what the mayor committed to in an official city memorandum, which you should have been provided to work from. Perhaps there was an oversight and you were not, but quoting from the memo, here is what the mayor says. This issue will move forward as quickly as possible, not sacrificing the public process required. To continue and quote, the City Council expressed, at a minimum, ensuring that construction that essentially creates an entirely new structure that resembles nothing of the structure that stood before be required to comply with current code. We expressed a desire for only true remodels to maintain various non-conforming entitlements. And finally, the mayor's memorandum goes on, additional policy considerations around this topic are other community benefits some degree of nonconformity may engender, such as tree preservation, end quote. Including the PC tour, this is the 5th work session on demolitions, February 28th, May 3rd, May 23rd, June 16th, and July 11th. Might I politely say with emphasis, it is now time to schedule a public hearing. That is what the NCC has sent me here this evening to convey. Staff seems to be looking for guidance for parameters around which to write the code for pre-existing nonconformities. For that direction, I refer them back to the city memorandum because it is the expectation of the NCC that the commitment in the mayor's memorandum, as explicitly written, be upheld. The stated City Council position, again, to quote, we expressed a desire for only true remodels to maintain various non-conforming entitlements. Now we know what a true remodel is and a demolition is. That means not structures that are defined as a remodel. And the City Council has clarified, demolition or demolish means removal of 50% or more of the total surface area of exterior walls or perimeter foundation of a residential structure. So then, clearly, to comply with the council directive, that same 50% or more removal must also apply to removing pre-existing nonconformities. Please give staff the direction to move this to a public hearing now at the earliest possible date. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hooker. Commissioners, questions for Ms. Hooker?
Oh, and just because I think it's relevant, I'll hand it to Iris. I have copies of the mayor's memorandum, highlighted the pieces that I excerpted this evening so that you can confirm them.
Commissioners, questions for Ms. Hooker? Ms. Hooker, one question is, it seemed like the Neighborhood Coalition Commission is very focused on the demolition aspect of it, meaning, you know, how much do you remove before it triggers a look at, you know, conformity to the existing development code. I didn't hear a lot about, you know, weapon if you're not really tearing down, but you're adding. And so that's the second thing we mentioned. Is there any feedback that the yourself or the Neighborhood Coalition has with regards to, you know, adding rather than just demolishing?
Yeah, I think that what I would do again is refer back to the mayor's communication, which is that if what you end up with is something that, in fact, is a new structure by all intents and purposes, then that's what we're looking to catch. So if you have a small 650 square foot home and you add on 3,000 square feet, well, yes. And so we did discuss this earlier in the work group, and understanding that that's something that would ultimately be caught as we moved forward.
All right, thank you. That clarifies that the feedback is that we're both interested in anything that would really change an existing home. And so if it's adding or demolishing, either one, if it's changing it significantly, then it should trigger some conformity to the current development code. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I don't believe we have any others who wish to make a public comment in tonight's work session. So I'd like to close public comment at this time and then ask the commissioners for any comments that we can give the staff on direction to pursue. Commissioners? Commissioner Phillips?
Okay, so if I understand it correctly, you're looking for the commission to say we concur with the stakeholders and the mayor that we have a problem. Is that the first step?
That's for you to decide.
I'm sorry?
That's for you to decide.
That's the decision
But yes,
before
we need direction
Okay,
on moving forward.
if that's the first step, I'm in agreement. We need to fix the problem, okay?
Thank you, Commissioner Phillips. Commissioner Rigby?
Just to make sure, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, thank you. I think definitely if we're going to look at percentages here, you know, I think we should be wary of something as low as 50%. I know Ms. Okert was talking about, you know, wanting to make sure that only true remodels are, you know, using that terminology. But, you know, just a few minutes ago, Director Siegel used an example that, you know, adding on a master suite could possibly put something over the 50% mark. And I think in many cases, we could see that that would be sort of a reasonable, you know, maybe substantial, but a remodel, even if we're labeling it as demolition. So, you know, I think when it comes to these continuations of non-conforming development in general, even, we need to be cognizant of the fact that, you know, those allowances are put in to counterbalance the, you know, substantial zoning power that, you know, we've given over to the city, et cetera. and that, I think we should be wary of tipping that balance when we already have a robust code and have addressed, or at least gone some way towards addressing the problem with these new this new demolition definition, which will bring about review by the city and have that fine attached to it.
Thank you, Commissioner Rigby. If I can summarize it, it sounds like you're concerned that, where do you set the percentages or the thresholds for additions and demolitions, but you're in favor of the commission moving this towards a hearing.
Really, in truth, I think that this issue, that we have gone a long way towards addressing this issue with the new demolition definition, and I don't think it's necessary for us to go forward with this. However, if we do decide to go that route, I think we should look at a higher percentage than 50.
Great, thank you, Commissioner Rigby. Commissioner Marino, any comments?
Nothing to.
All right, thank you. So I guess I'd like to then make a motion to say, can the commission give a recommendation to staff to continue the non-conforming residential development work and bring it to hearing? So this is a motion to move forward with the Plan Commission's work on non-conforming residential development. Is there a second?
A second.
Is there any discussion on the motion? Questions? No? And then we'll take a vote. Iris, would you call the roll?
Heap,
Yes?
Moreno,
Yes.
Phillips,
Yes.
Rigby.
No.
Thank you. And the vote for the commission is 3-1 to continue on the work. I think we've heard a lot of concerns about how difficult it may be to kind of get a really well-formed policy that meets all the objectives and keeps everybody happy. So I think it's going to be challenging work, but the commission's given the direction that we want to pursue both items. We want to pursue looking at when you're demolishing, what triggers a look at conforming to the current development code, as well as when you're adding to the floor area, when does that trigger a conformity to the existing development code? So the commission looks forward to that work. Any questions or comments that staff may have to the commission?
May I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
Sure, yeah. So I think when the council was discussing this and the demolition policy and the discussion of non-conforming development were decoupled, I think that they did that intentionally because I think they wanted to be able to address each of those issues individually. So I wouldn't say that, and I do disagree with Ms. Okert that we've now defined remodels as anything that replaces more than 50% of the dwelling through the demolition ordinance. The demolition ordinance is it's a permit process, so that when more than a certain percentage of the structure is removed, the neighbors are afforded the courtesy of a notice to let them know that this is coming, and then there's a waiting period. Second thing that definition does is that it establishes the basis for the tax. So that's not development, that's tax, and that's public communications with neighbors. So you really do have the ability, and the council will have the ability to establish criteria that, in the mayor's words, ensure that construction that essentially creates an entirely new structure that resembles nothing of the structure that stood before complies with current code. So I think he intentionally left that. I think that's clear policy direction, but it's not prescriptive standards, and they'll be looking to the commission, through the public hearing process to recommend appropriate standards around this. So any input or any guidance that you have for staff as we're drafting this, if we should put the 50% out there just as a sort of a test, balloon to get, see what the public testimony comes in on that. I think we'll want to be very clear that, these are the potential consequences or, examples like Commissioner Rigby was referring to. Alternatively, we could put two metrics or two potential standards, alternatives out there for people to respond to. But I appreciate how complex this is, and we don't want to make it more confusing than it already is. So any guidance that the commission has would be appreciated.
Thank you, Director Siegel. Is there any feedback that the commissioner wants to give to staff at this time regarding Director Siegel's question? Well, I just say, Director Siegel, yeah, I think it may be too simple. I know we want to keep the code simple and just say 50%, that's easy, but then the problems that it may incur, as Commissioner Rigby was alluding to, I think it would be good to look at, or have a set as we move it towards a public hearing, have a set of options. I'm not sure the commission has those options prepared tonight, but I'm thinking as we move towards public hearing, just having one option that would only say 50%, that may be too simple. So maybe that's the goal that we need to work with staff on, is coming up with a very discrete and hopefully short list, one or two, maybe three, whatever, no more than that, of what are the different options that we can look at beyond just the 50%.
I mean, it's on one level, it can be arbitrary. 50%, at least we have a policy basis for that now with the definition of demolition for purposes of the tax. But and you may decide that, or you may recommend a different standard for for an expansion of a dwelling. If a dwelling expands by more than some percentage, that may be a different standard. So if we are going to bring this to a hearing, the earliest we could bring this to a hearing would be December, and that would require community-wide notices issued in October that are mailed to every owner of residential property in the city. So it's a large undertaking, and we will need to make a decision on going forward. I mean, you've asked us to go forward, which we will, but we'll have to, hopefully tonight, come away with some guidance on what you'd like us to put out there for public comment.
Sure. Yeah. All right. Commissioners, direction on what exactly we'd like to put out for public comment? Yeah, I think we have short notice, but I'm not seeing, and we don't have the full commission here too. I think with missing the chair and the vice chair, we'd really like to take their inputs on this also to, specify what are the different options. So I hear from the neighborhood coalition that this is, they're asking us to prioritize this. And they want to move quickly. They recognize the fact that we've had a number of plan commission meetings on it, so we hear you. But I think there is some more work. So I'm not thinking the December timeframe is going to work. I think we're going to have another meeting to specifically look at this, and the goal would be to have the commissioners come back and make specific recommendations on what the options are.
Well, I could offer some options. So if the commission, and I understand we don't have Chair Leak or Vice Chair Stewart here, but if the full commission or more of the commissioners were able to work on this at your next meeting on September 26th, you do have a work session scheduled on the annual code amendments, but I think you've already gone over at least the concepts for those. So I think it's, it would be possible to have a discussion, a follow-up discussion on this after your work session on the annual code amendments. If that wouldn't be too soon, we could be prepared to do that, and that would still set you up for a hearing in December. It wouldn't delay the process at all.
Yeah, I think that would be an excellent recommendation. Commissioners, feedback on that? Commissioner Phillips?
Sounds good to me.
I think what you're suggesting is a way forward, but if I understood you correctly, we're going to, I mean, let's be clear about this. You guys have a lot more expertise on the staff about where this might fit, you know, where you get the nonconformity issue resolved, so to speak, and also have wide public support. Okay, that would be the goal, right? That's where we want to be, is that sweet spot. And nobody knows if 50% or 57% or 42%, nobody knows what that number really is, but we got to come up with a number some way, and I believe, you know, I'm not trying to pass it off to you guys, but you guys got more experience in this than we could ever put together in our combined. So if we could see some options, I believe that's what you're suggesting, that would be a good way forward for me anyway. Well, I've got the microphone real quick, related but not directly. Is there someone maybe I could speak to offline about the demolition tax? Is that like a, or maybe you can answer it, is that like a hard tax for every property? If it qualifies for demolition, it's an X amount of dollars, or is it based upon the value of the property? Is that a moving target with each homeowner, or is that one number?
It's a flat tax based on the removal of residential structures. Yeah. So yes, I can come back on the 26th with some options and with some data on those permits that we were, the report that Ms. Maureen Collins gave at your last meeting, we could try to parse that out to see if a standard were set at 80%, what, you know, how might that affect, you know, the number of permits that would have been subject to this requirement or not. I think that might help, because if we see a big swing, and you know, if the threshold is set at 80% and, you know, they all go away, then maybe we haven't really addressed the issue. You know, if it's a 50%, somewhere in between, we can look at that and try to test different standards for you.
And Director Siegel, is the only options really related to percentage? Is there any other way that we could define, you know, demolition or significant addition beyond just using percentages? I don't know. That's what I was trying to think about, but there was nothing that really came to mind. That's something that I was thinking maybe we could spend some time looking at. Is it just percentages that we're coming down to, or are there some other alternative ways to measure it?
Well, we have looked at different ways of regulating remodels or demolitions of non-conforming structures, whether it was a change in the valuation or reduction in valuation of the structure. Remember, we discussed a number of different ways of regulating that, and found that floor area was really the most, well, least, I would say it was the least subject to like distortion in the market, given how structures are built and how values are established. Using square footage was the most reliable way to do this. Whether it was, you know, the percentage change, we thought that was also, you know, more appropriate than just like trying to come up with like an amount of square footage. Like if more than a certain amount of floor area were removed, you know, that would somehow trigger this. Percentage is more progressive, I think, because it's scaled to the size of the dwelling. It's not fixed, like the demolition tax is fixed.
What about, I remember when we were discussing it, one of the things I found interesting would be the possibility of fusing several of these conditions together. So instead of just a simple percentage, is it, you know, the square footage increasing or going beyond a certain threshold, or, you know, the exterior walls are being torn down beyond a certain percentage, that you could actually create a set of like OR conditions. So it could be, you know, the exterior walls, the square footage, or the amount of, you know, increased value in the home, something like that. So you take a look at maybe several of the different criterias, and it becomes an OR condition to say, if any of those conditions are met, then that triggers, you know, compliance with the current development code. Is that a possibility where we could look at, you know, not just making it a single criteria decision, but we take a couple factors, yeah, and you bring them, and it seems like that would, to me, it seemed like it would result in kind of a better definition that you're catching it, that where we run into the problems today is that, you know, if it's just a simple percentage, whether it's, you know, added value or whatever, it's like developers, whoever can kind of find a way to get around the system. But if we had, you know, several different conditions, and we took a look at it and we said, if any one of these conditions, this condition or this condition or this condition is met, then that's going to, that any one of those are going to trigger, you know, compliance to the current development code. Could we look at it that? I thought that seemed pretty promising to try to resolve the issues and cut down on the amount of, you know, workarounds that people could do, is that you try to catch it all by bringing all those conditions, not just one, together.
Well, I think you'll do that. If we're going to require additions to, if we're going to require the project that is adding more than some percentage or some amount of floor area to bring the whole property into conformance, we're going to be looking at the additional floor area more than likely. And then on the removal part, I would recommend that we use the same standard or the same basis that we have for the demolition tax and the demolition permit, which is the removal of exterior walls or perimeter foundation. Because I think when we discussed whether to use floor area for that before, when we were talking about demolitions, it seemed like that would be more prone to, I don't know, loopholes are not the right word, but just more prone to error or falling through the cracks, you know, issues with floor area, because, you know, there were just internal remodels that are really not affecting the exterior, they're not affecting the relationship to the neighbor. If that internal floor area were removed, that would then trigger, you know, the demolition tax. I don't know if you remember that discussion, but that's, anyway, I would just recommend that if we're going to draft an ordinance that captures both the removal and the addition, that we use for the addition, that we use the addition of floor area, because that's how we regulate in the development code, is, you know, how much floor area are you allowed to have on a lot? And if we're regulating or we're requiring full conformance where more than a certain percentage of something is removed, I would say, or more than something is removed, that we are regulating the percentage, the surface area of the exterior walls and foundation, just like we do for demolition. So I don't know, I'm just trying to help us move this forward, and
we appreciate all the comments and feedback. Thank you. It is very helpful.
Sure.
But one thing I'm thinking about was, I remember when we discussed this before the commission before, it was getting to a lot of complexities. We started talking about superstructures. You know, what's the threshold when you change the superstructure? What happens? You know, I mean, is there a scenario where somebody could, you know, change a small amount of the floor area, but the whole roof is gone? You know, they're doing a whole new roof, and, you know, I'm not sure that counts towards the floor area, but, you know, if you've got the whole roof off and you're changing that, you know, would somebody view that as a simple remodel, or is that, should that also, you know, trigger? And maybe when we look at the data, we'll find that, you know, out of the small percentage that you were indicating, that those type of issues are not very common. You know, that maybe the square footage would be covering most of the cases that we've observed looking at the most recent history on remodels.
Well, the work group that, you know, considered all of those different dimensions of this and recommended the approach that we've presented to you, that is perimeter wall area, perimeter foundation. And for demolitions, it's more than 50% of one or the other is removed, it triggers the tax, triggers the permit requirement. I think I understand that they've made the same recommendation, or the chair's committee is recommending the same approach for regulating nonconformities. Now, how we regulate the additions, I think that we probably look at, you know, some other metric, at whether it's floor area or overall volume and, the structure that's added, to take into account height. We'll develop some proposals and make that part of the public hearing draft.
Well, commissioners, any final comments? I mean, there was a bit of discussion with Director Siegel here. Do any of the commissioners feel that kind of the options that have been discussed here tonight are sufficient? Or do you still feel that, we should take another meeting at our next meeting in September to kind of vet the list of options that we'd want to put forth in a public hearing? Commissioner Phillips?
I'm ready to look at options.
What's that?
I'm ready to look at options.
So you want to continue with looking at options at our next meeting that we want more input?
I'll leave it to the staff when they think they can get this ready. This is a complicated issue, so I'm sure this is not the only thing on your agenda, but if it's available for the next meeting, we wouldn't be locked into those options. We could, at least a basis for discussion is all I'm looking for.
Well, but Commissioner Phillips, maybe I wasn't clear, sorry. I was asking with the discussion we've had here tonight and the option of just the exterior walls and going with a percentage of that, 50% is removed, that would trigger conformance, or a percentage of the square footage. Are those options enough to say, we can move forward? Let's recommend to staff that we proceed with the public hearing, or do we want to still study even more options at the next meeting? So my question was just rechecking what we said earlier to say, based on our just current discussion here, have we changed our minds at all? And the options that Director Siegel has outlined, are those sufficient, or do we want to take more input from the rest of the commission and again take it the next meeting to discuss more on what the options are?
Listen, if the issue is just to have our other commissioners available, I'm certainly amenable to waiting on them to let them have an input to it. Okay, but yeah. So if you want to wait, I'm perfectly fine with that. If they need some, if they want to weigh in on where we want to go with this.
Okay, so I take you as favoring waiting for the other commissions to review the options. Yeah.
I think so, because in fairness to our colleagues, I think I'd be more than, I'd feel awful if they had some stuff and we were moving it along faster than they were ready. Okay, but I also feel strongly that we need to move this along as soon as we can.
Commissioner Rigby?
Thank you. I concur that it would be a good idea to have the input of the rest of the commissioners, of which there are many who are not here. But I think part of what we're lacking is not so much options, but context. So it would be useful to have some sort of, I know Director Siegel, you said something about maybe bringing in some data, but it would be nice to know, if for this sort of remodel, what does the change in, floor area or external wall area, what does that look like? Because I think as it is, we are, as was mentioned before, maybe crawling around in a sort of arbitrary number situation.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Rigby. Commissioner Marino, any recommendation on extending our discussion on reviewing options, or you feel comfortable with what we've discussed last night is enough to tell staff to move forward and start looking at the public hearing with the options that we've talked about tonight?
Well, I agree that it would be a good idea to wait for the rest of the commission so that they can provide input based on what Director Siegel was mentioning. And
Right.
I think for the next meeting, it would be a good idea. I welcome that opportunity.
Okay, thank you. So I guess, the commission's direction to staff is we would like to have the next meeting and review kind of in more detail what the options are. I think the commission is very sensitive to what we heard tonight from the Neighborhood Commission, that they would really like to see this move forward with priority and move quickly. But commission feels like we'd like to make sure that we're getting all the options out there correctly for public hearing, and we're really thinking it through. So we'll take the next meeting to review more with the other commissioners.
With the hope that we can come up with assurance that we're going to be ready for a public hearing in December. and not have to put it off anymore.
Yeah. Thank
We
you.
can do that.
Right. Right. Any other final comments commissioners have? Otherwise, we'll close out our work session tonight on the non-conforming residential development. I see none. So we'll move on in the agenda. We'll move on to item number 8, other business. Item 8.1 talks about potential planning commission fall retreat and training opportunities. Director Siegel, is there any information you'd like to share with the commission on that?
No, not at this time. I think when you go into, or when Chair Leak, meets with staff to begin planning the goal setting meeting, we'll be looking for your input on what sort of training or professional development opportunities you're interested in.
All right, thank you. Then we'll move on to item number 9, schedule review. Director Siegel, would you like to give us an update on the schedule?
Sure. So your next meeting is September 26th, and you have a work session scheduled on the annual Community Development Code amendments. That'll be the final work session prior to the public hearing on that in November. You'll also have the continuation of the discussion that we had this evening on non-conforming development policy, and that's it on the 26th. Your next meeting after that is on October 10th, and currently there's a public hearing scheduled that will be going forward on the mitigation requirements for ministerial development permits, which the Commission has conducted a work session on that prior in July. So those are your next 2 meetings. The second meeting in October, I just call your attention to that because it's not on a Monday. It's on Tuesday the 25th, I think, due to a court hearing that's scheduled that conflicted on Monday. So please save the date. Thank you.
In the October 25th meeting that's on a Tuesday, that's a meeting that we'll have here in the chambers here. Is that correct?
I think that's a goal-setting meeting. So did we, Iris, did we say that this room was available on Tuesday the 25th? It is. So for now, we're planning on having that meeting here.
Right.
Unless it's scheduled as a retreat, in which case Eric, our senior planning manager, Olson, will be working with Chair Lee on where to hold that meeting.
And the other question was, in discussion with staff and Chair Lee, there was a meeting that we were scheduling to get an update on the community emergency response and some of the radio work that the assistant fire marshal is doing. That's, I forgot, is that on the October 25th or is that the?
Yeah, it is on, yeah, thank you. It is on October 25th. So wherever that meeting is held, that presentation will follow you. It'll be you'll receive that presentation wherever the meeting is held, whether it's in a retreat offsite or if it's in this room.
Okay, great, thank you. Commissioners, any questions on the schedule? Commissioner Rigby, Phillips? No? No further questions? So thank you. We'll make a motion to adjourn tonight. All those in favor of adjourning? Aye.
Aye.
Motion's approved. We're adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.